Jill Abramson is the former executive editor of the New York Times. She's currently a visiting professor at Harvard and working on a big book about the news industry. She speaks tomorrow in the Twin Cities, and I'll tell you about that coming up. But first, without further ado, hello, Jill. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be with you.
Well, it is just as a former journalist, TV journalist myself, I'm just kind of giddy to chat with you. So many things to ask. First of all, tell us about this book. I heard you inked a pretty big book deal in February, and you're writing about the state of news coverage.
I am, and the future and where it's all going. We're, living through an incredible time of tumult in the news industry where, most readers are getting their news through social media. Facebook turns out to be the number one place that most people turn to for news. Very different from the years that I was growing up when a few dominant news organizations and their editors, like the New York Times, were the people who picked the news and decided why and what people were going to know about.
Well, and you have really been witness to, either as an observer when you were in college or covered some of the very major news events of our times. Tell us about some of those and some of your memories, kind of what sticks out in your mind.
Well, what sticks out in my mind, first of all, is what inspired me to become a journalist when I was in college, which was the Watergate coverage of Woodward and Bernstein. I was glued to the Watergate hearings. I went to Harvard. I would run to the newsstand in Cambridge and buy 3-day-old Washington Post, the physical newspaper, so I could actually read their stories. Because
amazing, it was 3 days old.
There was no internet then.
Wow. And so what was it that drew you in, Jill?
I just thought that, the secret nexus of money and politics that those hearings exposed about what was going on in the Nixon re-election campaign, and that money was being stuffed away in a White House safe. I just thought that was both disturbing and fascinating and, certainly rose to the level of what the founders of this country wanted the media to do, which is hold power accountable.
You mentioned the internet and social media. What do you think is sort of the best and the worst when you compare the time that you're talking about when you had to wait 3 days for those heavily edited and fact-checked. I mean, they were heavily edited and fact-checked Washington Posts that you were picking up 3 days later. But now things are just instantaneous. If you heard about something 10 minutes ago, it's old news.
It's true. And the worst of that is, of course, when misinformation and news that isn't really news takes off and develops a life of its own. I remember being very troubled at the time of the Boston Marathon bombing when there were sites pointing to suspects who weren't suspects. And, there were satellite dishes on people's lawns for no reason, causing them a lot of distress. And, rumor travels, I worry, sometimes as fast as credible news. So that's the bad side. But the good side is, for people who really want to stay on top of minute-by-minute developments, places like Twitter have become invaluable to people.
Yeah, and I've been tweeting actually since Thursday about your appearance coming on. And that is also you're welcome. It's a fun way to let people all over the country, really, or all over the Twitterverse, know that you'll be on. And it's another way to share this content we're doing here in Minneapolis with you if people want to drop in online anywhere in the world. So I would think that's a positive.
That absolutely is a positive, but unrelated to me.
Well,
yes,
I mean, it's it's the kind of thing where I hope that today's journalists, not being a reporter anymore, one of the things that I get frustrated with is that reporters have now kind of become personalities, and I think that has taken away.
I think we're even supposed to call them all brands.
Is instead of the neutral observers that you were being, and I understand your first job as a stringer at the Time Boston bureau,
right.
And you were just supposed to report the news.
Right, and not be part of the story, but people have become fascinated not only with the news, but the people reporting it, and so we've seen that trend develop over time. The New York Times right now. When I first joined the Times, there was a big debate about whether Times journalists should even be allowed to go on television.
Really?
Because, the idea was the important thing was the New York Times, not the individual journalist.
And so you couldn't be picked out of a crowd or something like that.
But now, they have a special feature that, is pretty popular called Times Insider, which are all of the backstories about their reporters and how they got their stories. And some of it's very interesting, but it's a long way from we don't want, our individual journalists to have a star system.
Exactly. My guest is Jill Abramson. She is a professor at Harvard and author, the former executive editor of the New York Times. If you want to share any of your comments with her or ask any questions, give us a call at 651-989-9226 or 866-989-9226. You can also text us at 81807. So Jill Abramson had a lot of firsts in her career. She was the first woman to become Washington bureau chief, managing editor, and executive editor at the New York Times. But a year ago, you also had a pretty big public ouch when you were fighting for your own pay equity. I would love for you to share your thoughts on that. A year later now, I'm hoping it's kind of behind you more, and your thoughts just as you look back. And pay equity has been such a big topic all year.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton talked about it in her kickoff speech in New York yesterday. I would not want people to be under the impression that, I got fired from my job purely because there was, a pay issue under negotiation. It was, one factor among many where there were some differences of approach between me and my betters at the Times. But I do think it's, my takeaway just on that issue is that it's very important for women to negotiate smartly about their pay and to not be timid about asking if they're replacing a man in a job with the man in that job was most recently paid, and simply to negotiate. I thought myself, when I was named executive editor, I was just so bowled over and thrilled to get the job. I didn't raise it at the point it would have been appropriate to do so, which is right then and there. And then it became, sort of a festering issue, which wasn't a good way for me to deal with that.
Right. So you even learned from that experience, timing can be everything.
Yeah. And just, the biggest pay gaps, it's interesting with women are like at the very, very top. In the C-suite, that's where some of the biggest disparities are seen. I was just reading an article about that.
Yeah, no, very interesting. We're going to take a quick break, but we have more after the break with Jill Abramson. If you want to share your comments, your questions, give us a text, 81807, or call 651-989-9226 or 866-989-9226. We'll be right back. Roshini Rajkumar back with you. I'm speaking with Jill Abramson. She will be speaking at Women Winning's annual event Monday, June 15th at the Minneapolis Depot. That luncheon, I'm pretty sure, is sold out, but you may want to check in with Women Winning to see if you can somehow get involved, because Jill's talk, no doubt, will be very interesting. We've already heard from her here. You can call in and chat with us and Jill today. 651-989-9226 or 866-989-9226. You can also text 81807. Peter is on the line from Litchfield. Hi, Peter.
And good afternoon to you, ladies. I have two quick questions for Jill. Number one, if you were in charge of ABC News, would you have hired George Stephanopoulos out of the Clinton White House? And number two, if you were the head of ABC News, would you have fired Stephanopoulos for his performance over the Clinton book dust-up?
I think the dust-up was over donations he made to the Clinton Foundation. Your first question, I think, is an interesting one. But, I would say, I think that over the years that George Stephanopoulos has been a pretty searching and intelligent kind of news anchor, both his Sunday morning show, and then I don't watch the ABC morning show during the week, but he's gotten good reviews on that. And he's hardly the only person from the political world to be brought on in that capacity by a network. I mean, Tim Russert was someone who was very respected for being even-handed, and he, too, had worked in Democratic politics before he went to NBC. And, some of the questioners on Fox and hosts have backgrounds in politics. So I don't think that that's disqualifying. I think Stephanopoulos himself has said, I don't think it was wise for him to make that donation and not disclose it.
Yeah, I mean, that seemed like really the problem there. And another thing that I like to point out about those morning show hosts on the national shows, and this is where it gets kind of a little blurry, Stephanopoulos has, after being a political operative, moved into a role that's technically a news anchor, right? And he's not really supposed to have open opinions. So to not disclose a donation like that is kind of the big thing. But it also just doesn't look good. I mean, if I were in his shoes, I don't know that I would be making that donation, especially as we're in kind of the throngs, the beginning launches of the 2016 presidential campaign. You have said in your own words that you're naturally shy, but you found that you liked asking strangers what they thought about fraught matters and accurately reporting what they said.
It's true.
The piece in the accuracy, Jill Abramson, and you hear about the whole Brian Williams scandal over at NBC. I don't think we're going to see him back in the anchor chair again. And that was at the very...
That's what I'm reading.
Yeah, the very crux of that is accuracy. So when you're seeing this stuff happening at the national level, not rookie mistakes.
The difficulty, it's accuracy, I think, Roshini, and it's also a little bit those jobs, there's a little bit of a confusion about whether it's news or entertainment in some ways. And, Brian Williams, was often on, things like Letterman, and it's I'm not excusing it at all, but when you get into those more relaxed, entertaining, showcases, sometimes the facts aren't as scrupulously followed as they should be in the news.
Exactly. I'm talking with Jill Abramson, and you can talk with her too. Give us a call, 651-989-9226, or text 81807. She was the executive editor of the New York Times until just over a year ago. She rose to the highest position at that publication and at others where she had worked. Now she is working at Harvard, teaching English, as well as writing a book about the state of news. One of the things that I've also found really interesting are all the different places you've been and the context that you've had. Sometimes they're accidental. And one of them, which was really amazing to read about, Jill, is that you were a bridesmaid with Patty Hearst at your Harvard friend's wedding. Oh, my gosh. Tell us about that.
I know. Another early memory from college for me is I was sitting with my roommate who had a television, and we were watching the nightly news, and the bulletin that Patty Hearst had been kidnapped came across, and my roommate started screaming, and I had no idea why, and it turned out that they had been very good friends at a boarding school together before college. And then, of course, the whole saga of Patty's kidnapping and then her getting the new revolutionary name Tanya over the months, that unfolded, and I remained glued to that. And, she was punished and then pardoned. And by the time my roommate got married, she had been pardoned, and seemed, it was a little surreal being, in a powder blue formal dress that matched her and that
I was going to ask what color it was.
I liked her a lot. She had a great sense of humor, and I've seen that come out in her in the years since. She's very close to the filmmaker John Waters, and, has appeared in some of his films.
Right. Well, very interesting. I didn't want to forget to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's definitely a piece of personal trivia.
So in hearing, I guess it was on social media that you were coming on or finding out, one of my listeners sent me this amazing article out of the University of Pennsylvania called The Uncomfortable Questions You Should Be Asking About Pay Equity. And there are a lot of different anecdotes as well as stats in there, including talking about Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, who in April said that he would bring everybody's salaries up to the minimum of $70,000 if they weren't already making that, kind of stunning his whole workforce. What are your thoughts about something like that?
I think it's good. I think sometimes people don't pay attention. I know, at the Times we, did a study of whether there was, gender pay inequity in the newsroom, and some of the things we found were surprising even to me, and I thought I kept a pretty close eye on things. So, sometimes it takes a radical move to make sure that everybody receives fair treatment. That isn't to say, I don't think that all workplaces should pay everybody exactly the same salary for very different scales of work. But, when men and women are doing the same job, they should be paid equally.
Right. Well, the article, one of the people was quoted saying it's kind of a quasi-legal, quasi-ethical question because it involves, the law, but it also involves individual management making that final determination on what a salary is going to be for an individual.
Right. It isn't, salaries aren't the only issues. I mean, sometimes I read something that I thought was very revealing about a week ago that said, that when there are programs at work, like flexible work hours or family leave, that when those programs are pitched as mainly programs for women, the women who use them, it often ends up holding back their careers. But at companies that pitch those programs and encourage men to participate in them too, it does not have that effect.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. I think that an important of these issues is that it's well past the time that we invite men into this conversation, that for too long when we talk about these issues. It's been women talking among ourselves only.
That is true. I wanted to give you a few seconds to preview your keynote tomorrow at the Women Winning Luncheon in Minneapolis. I think they're expecting about 12 or 1,300 people. It's usually a big ceremonial event as well as just very inspirational. Can you give us a little preview of that?
Sure. I'm going to, talk about the importance of having women elected at all levels of the government and of women serving in the most important positions in our society, and that, we can't expect that it's going to be a glide path, and it certainly hasn't been. I mean, Roshini, going back to the 2010 elections, that was the first time in quite a while that there's actually a dip in the number of women elected, both here in Minnesota and federally. So, there are setbacks along the way, but, slow and steady progress is being made. And I'm going to talk a lot about the importance of resilience and why I think women tend to be so resilient, and that quality can be very important in promoting the goal of seeing women succeed.
And real quickly, Jill, when is the book coming out? I'm sure a lot of people want to read it.
Not for a couple of years.
Okay.
I'm just in the reporting phase.
All right. Well, we will look for that. Jill Abramson, just a pleasure to speak with you. Good luck with the book.
Thanks
Good luck
so
at
much.
Harvard. And thanks so much. Have fun.